Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Comic Shop Adventure, my weekly excursion where I leave the homestead here at Athletic Geek HQ in search of a bounty of comics, graphic novels, action figures, collectibles, and all things in between. First things first, time to talk about what stood out from last week's bounty, and first one's Mr. and Mrs. X. I have to recognize that book first, with the Mojo Vision story with Gambit and Rogue and kind of the ending and where it's going. It was really well written, great book. Very, very interested to see where it goes because it left me feeling like scared and sad and wanting to know what happens. So, yeah, I can't wait for the next installment of that series. That's kind of the hallmark of a good book that, you really doesn't get touched on a lot. If you're really jonesing for the next issue, then it's one of the better books that you read in that pull or whatever you have. Detective Comics was very good. I really don't want to spoil it, but someone very close to Bruce that's been around for a long, long time has perished, and it's kind of a curveball, but it was still very, very horrific and sad, and just how it was written with Bruce's like franticness trying to save them. I really thought it was well written. I was sad and just yeah, just a very, very good book. And I don't want to spoil too much because I want people to pick it up, but I almost cried at the end of it because just the way they kind of told that story and what this character has meant. Kind of an unsung hero for Bruce's life, and no longer with the Bat family now. And finally, the last book that I really want to recognize is Deadpool. Just just another really entertaining, fun book with it's like a Three Little Pigs kind of deal with Deadpool, and it's just been kind of your weekly. I should say weekly, but maybe like your monthly fun book, with all these like long storylines and really, some deep, sometimes tragic subject matter. It's nice to just go back to Deadpool and just have some fun. And those are my top 3 from last week. I'll see you when I return here with this week's bounty. Hey everyone, I am back here at the Homestead Athletic Geek HQ. Got a pretty interesting bounty this week, and let's just get right to it. We're going to start off in the world of Marvel with Avengers number 12. More of the Stan Lee tribute covers, but really like this one. It looks really cool. And they're getting ready for a big crossover with Avengers and Thor. So fortunately I read both of those books, so at least I'll be able to follow this crossover and not just be buying books for the sake of collecting. But yeah, there's that one. And then we have Thor. Thor number 9 by Jason Aaron. These are both just well-written books by Jason Aaron. And yeah, they're probably the best Marvel book, with the exception of Dead Man Logan and Deadpool, probably some of the better Marvel works out there. And I just sing the praises of Mr. and Mrs. X, so I'm reading all that I feel is the best Marvel going on right now. But these have been absolutely, great books, especially Thor, where Thor's never really been one of my A-listers yet. I get really pumped up about Thor every time I see that it's in my pull list. So I got to give credit to Jason Aaron for that. So got these two, and eventually they're on a collision course for a crossover. So we'll see if the seeds are planted to that in these 2 issues right here. From there we go to the last Marvel book of this week's pull, and it is Uncanny XMen number 9. I remember saying last week when I had 7 and 8 that it was their time to step it up or I would quit buying. Well, I'm not going to say they hit a home run and knocked it out of the park, but they hit it well enough that they got me for number 9. So we're going to stay on board. But I don't know how much longer I'm going to stay on board. But I want to stay on board the Uncanny XMen train until I decide that it's just not a train worth riding anymore. But it stepped up enough that I dropped some money on this next issue, and we'll see where it goes from there. From there we have my lone image title with that's at least being printed right now, with Saga taking a year-long hiatus. We have Prodigy number 2 by Mark Millar. I love Mark Millar. I like a lot of his work. and like a lot of the things that he's done at Image with Chrononauts and Starlight and things like that. And this number one was an interesting book. It's about this guy. He's a prodigy. He's just really smart, and it's just kind of works for the government, and it's just really, really interesting. And I liked it enough that I'm gonna keep reading it, and we'll see if issue 2 is as good as issue 1. My explanation for what the book is about seems pretty basic, but can't really talk too much about it without giving a whole lot away, and I don't really want to spoil too much on this show, because I want to encourage you to go out and be surprised and pick up the books and then have the same reactions that I did when I read particular comics. So I can't give too much away about Prodigy, but I do highly advise, if your local comic shop has an issue 1, pick it up and then come back for issue 2 if you enjoyed it. So, Mark Millar Prodigy, number 2. From there, we go to the DC portion of the bounty, and we start off with Batman number 62. Got a Professor Pig issue here, and, it's that's kind of a character that could really, it's a really dark character that maybe not a lot is done with in the Batman universe, but kind of, you've heard me say about how I feel about Tom King and his consistency, but I'm still on board with the book, and I'm willing to see what he'll do with this Professor Pig story here. I think it's also kind of funny. We have a Professor Pig story in Batman, and then on the ride over before the adventure began, I was praising Deadpool for having kind of a sick, twisted Deadpool version of the Three Little Pigs that he was a merc for, or trying to get down. It's I don't know what it is about pigs with this episode of the comic book adventure, but they are abundant. So, yep, Batman number 62. From there, we go to Nightwing number 56, and the cover, this whole storyline's been kind of, to me. Like, I don't hate it, but it's just kind of not been my favorite Nightwing story since, Nightwing's kind of came back in the DC Rebirth. But the thing that really stood out for me is it says, "At last, the return of Rick Grayson," and Rick is spelled like Ric Flair. And that's the only other time in the world I've ever seen Rick spelled that way. So that just kind of drew my attention for no other reason than they're spelling Rick like they did Ric Flair. So it's an okay story, and kind of interested to see who Rick Grayson is. I don't know if he styles and profiles, and if he's a kiss-stealing, wheel-and-dealing son of a gun, but he's in Nightwing, and he shares a surname with another Rick Grayson, Richard Grayson, Dick Grayson. Yeah, I think that's all the names he's ever had. So, we'll see what comes of this, but that's probably the one thing that really caught my attention whenever I picked up this book this week. So, Nightwing 56. From there, we go to The Green Lantern number 3 by Grant Morrison. I've enjoyed this book for, the previous 2 issues. I know a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about Morrison, his writing style, and this book in general. I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed how you can tell he's a big fan and has a lot of respect for the history of this character. And that doesn't always necessarily mean that a book is good, not trying to drag anybody's name through the mud, but Dan Slott has a lot of respect for the history of Spider-Man, yet I wasn't really a huge fan of a lot of his Spider-Man work, which is kind of goes against the norm because a lot of people liked it. But, you got to have more than just respect for the character's very good story. But I've enjoyed the previous 2 issues. He's kind of getting away from the War of Light and all the different cores out there, and kind of bringing back some more Silver Age Green Lantern villains that really haven't been used a whole lot since Jeff Johns put all the different core out there and made it just kind of change the character up. Not that Johns did a bad job; it's one of the greatest runs in comics history, but sometimes it's kind of nice to go back to your roots, and I feel, at least in the previous 2 issues, that Morrison has done that well. And yeah, so we will see how it plays out. It says Cop versus God, and the the cover looks like Hal Jordan is trying to arrest the Christian God, but I don't think that's, well, I wouldn't put anything past Grant Morrison, so we will see how this plays out and see what kind of controversy Mr. Morrison is going to stir up with issue 3 of the Green Lantern. And finally, we come to the final comic book of this week's bounty. We have Justice League number 15. I really enjoyed the previous issue with the Justice League going to Thanagar, and with Hawkgirl and Hawkman and all that different kind of stuff. As I said before, it kind of brought me back to having some memories of the Justice League cartoon from back in the early 2000s with where I became a fan of Hawkgirl. That's like really the series that made me a fan of Hawkgirl, her and her relationship with Jon Stewart and everything. So just from a fanboy perspective, that was pretty cool for me. It was a good story, and I'm excited to see it continue. So, Justice League 15. And the last part of the bounty today is a DC Multiverse spoiler action figure. I found this there, and it was on. It wasn't, too expensive, and I remember just being a fan of Stephanie Brown, the spoiler. I've enjoyed her in the Robin books. Whenever I was younger, that was my first real exposure to her. She was kind of like Robin's partner. And if you read my collection comics of the week, you know that I really enjoyed the Robin series from the late 90s by Chuck Dixon. And spoiler was a big part of that, and I became a fan of her through those comics. And I always really liked her through the comics, but since she wasn't really like on TV or anything whenever I was a kid and playing with action figures, they didn't really have any spoiler action figures, and I always wanted one because I thought she was cool in the comics. So this is kind of cool for me to finally, at long last, have a Stephanie Brown spoiler action figure. It'll probably be going behind me on the Batman wall somehow, or wherever I can find a spot for it. If not, it will go somewhere, definitely. And yeah, thought it was pretty cool. And that is pretty much it for the comic shop adventure this week. Let me know what you picked up at your local comic shop in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and like to see others like it, please give me a like, share, and subscribe. Got content not just from the world of comic books, but from the world of gaming, wrestling, and all things geek culture. Go like the Facebook page at facebook.com/athleticgeek89 for more content, including my collection comic of the week every Thursday. But until then, I'm out. Y'all be cool. Later.